everyone. My name is Stephen Bergstrom. I'm the Acting Director of Learner Support for the CPA Western School of Business. We have folks joining us this evening literally from across the country, literally from coast to coast. We've got some folks from CPA Atlantic, we've got some folks from Ontario, and then of course the Western School of Business from Manitoba to the other coast. Just a couple of quick housekeeping items here before I hand things over to Debbie, our speaker this evening. This evening's webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be posted on D2L. Usually takes us a couple of days to do the editing and polishing up, but will be posted on D2L within a couple of days. One request for everybody, we do encourage questions, but please use the Q&A function to ask your questions. There's a few of us going to be in the background here answering questions as we go along, but the only way we can really see the questions is if you put them in the Q&A box. So please use the Q&A function for your questions. We will have a few minutes at the end of the webinar to go over some of the more common questions that come up over the course of the evening. So without any further ado, I am going to hand things over to Debbie. Thanks very much, Debbie. Take it away.
Thank you. Well, welcome everyone to the CFE Support webinar series. Today, our webinar is about the path to competent and day 2. So again, a big thank you to the great partnership between CPA Western School of Business, CPA Ontario, and CPA Atlantic School of Business. They've made sure that the time and resources were put aside to ensure this valuable information is available to you as you prepare to write CFE in May. I wanted to highlight that this webinar will be approximately 70 minutes or so, and then I am going to open the floor for any questions that you may have. Also, as Stephen mentioned, if you have questions during the webinar, please use the Q&A function, and my colleagues will be very happy to help you. So again, use the Q&A function. Due to time constraints, if we don't have an opportunity to answer your question, then please do not hesitate to reach out to your region or your province. So I've included their email addresses here. So again, just to restate that this webinar is being recorded. It will be available in about 2 days, and you can find it in D2L on the home page for Introduction to Capstone 2 and CFE, or if you're enrolled in Capstone 2, you can also find it on that home page. I hope by this point that you have a clear understanding of how important, it's critical that you create an effective outline. It increases your chances of passing CFE. So as a result, today I'm going to review the planning process that was created by CPA Canada, and I'm going to use that process as I create a partial outline for a day 2 case. I'm going to share with you best practices on how to create an efficient and effective outline in Word. To increase your chances of meeting the breadth and depth requirements, I'm going to take some time and review the key expectations from the Board of Examiners. I'm also going to talk about the approach and the structure that you should use when you perform your quantitative and qualitative analysis. Approach and structure matters. Why does it matter? Because it increases your chances of providing a competent response. And hopefully you've all had an opportunity to watch the Understanding the CFE webinar, where I really outlined the different expectations that are needed to meet level 1, 2, 3, and 4. And we know for level 2 and 3, it's all about meeting an undisclosed number of competent responses. Last but certainly not least, I'm going to highlight some of the common problems that the Board of Examiners have identified when it comes to the financial reporting responses. So let's start with critical reading, outlining, and planning. So there are two main benefits of having a planned approach when it comes to a case. The first benefit is this helps you remain calm. I'm hoping you've all had an opportunity to watch the stress management webinar. And we know another key success factor to passing CFE is to control your stress. So when you have a planned approach, it actually helps build confidence. It gives you a sense of control and it ensures that you have a consistent approach when it comes to every case that you write. It also helps you achieve the requirements when it comes to depth and breadth. So let me talk about that in the context of CFE. So depth is about the level of detail required. When it comes to your qualitative analysis, it's also about not simply stating the case fact. It's important for you to answer that question, so what? What is the potential positive or negative impact to the company? When it comes to breadth, from a quantitative perspective, that's including an appropriate number of correct inputs. Qualitative, it's identifying an appropriate number of qualitative factors based on the case facts provided. If you've written a day 2 case, I'm sure you have a clear sense that there's an awful lot of requirements. There's a lot of case facts. So to be successful and to kind of reduce that overwhelming sensation, candidates need an approach that logically organizes your assessment opportunities or your required, what you're being asked to do, and the respective case facts in a way that meets the user's needs. I want to read this first paragraph. It's so important. Planning is the cornerstone to CFE success, and it's the most important phase in approaching a case. Planning helps you to see the big picture and lays the foundation for a well thought out response. As a result, CPA Canada recommends that you spend between 25 to 30% of the case length's time reading the case, creating your outline, and planning. Now, I know that that might seem excessive, but it is going to make a significant difference when it comes to turning that outline into your response. Please do not fall into that trap of starting to write your response without creating an effective outline. And I want to clarify what I mean when I say effective outline. Many of the outlines that candidates, I've seen them do, they simply outline the required. That's not an effective outline. I'm talking about extracting the relevant case facts so you can turn it into a response. So why create an outline? Within this first less than 10 minutes, I've mentioned outline numerous times. It is critical. The goal is to highlight the case facts. How you do that is by creating an outline where you've extracted the relevant case facts. It allows you to manage your time. That outline is your roadmap map to your response, and it helps you see the big picture. Now, there's no right or wrong answer as far as whether you created outline on paper or electronically in Word. However, I find that some candidates really struggle with some of these questions. I always say, let's talk about these. Does it take you longer to read the case? Are you missing required and or key case facts? Are you struggling meeting the breadth requirement when it comes to your qualitative analysis? Are you feeling that big time crunch? If the answer to some or most of these questions is yes, I really strongly encourage you to practice creating your outline in Word because you will be able to have a positive impact on some of those challenges that I've listed here. The last challenge, I'm going to share a best practice when we create the partial outline. Candidates are unsure of what they're being asked to do. A great best practice is to write the required word for word and then break it down into smaller pieces. More often than not, the user is asking you to comment on a few things. And a fundamental principle to increase your chances of achieving a competent response is everything they ask you about, it's important that you address. The key is to determine what works best for you. So let's take the next 25 to 30 minutes and let's create a partial outline for a day 2 case. Now, for the candidates who are enrolled in Capstone 2, I'm going to be reviewing partly the Elgar case. So, for those of you who've done it, you should be quite familiar. This is the 9-step planning process that's outlined by CPA Canada. I hope you're all familiar with it. And whether you're consciously or unconsciously, you're doing each of these steps as you read, create your outline. I'm going to go through each of these steps as we create this partial outline. So as everyone is aware, the day 2 case is the same case for everyone. There's some common information for all roles. So there's narrative information. There's also common appendices for all roles. Then there are specific information. So there's a narrative that outlines your required for each of the roles. Plus there are specific exhibits for your role. So today I am going to use the performance management role and we're going to be guided through that information. Again, only focus on the information you need to look at. Don't go look at what another role needs to do. You have too much to do already. So the first step of the planning process is to allocate time to planning. CPA Canada recommends that you allocate approximately 75 minutes to read the case and create your outline. And then an additional 15 minutes to kind of take a moment and reflect, determine what needs to be done, order your requireds, and allocate the time. So to start, the first thing I'm going to do for ROP, which is reading, outlining, and planning, I'm going to allocate that 90 minutes. And you notice I've put my start time at 9 and my finish time at 10:30. So I should have that all done by 10:30. The writing time, the remaining 210 minutes, so that's from 10:30 to 2 o'clock. Once I know what the requireds are, I'll be breaking that time down further. A very important golden rule is you must manage your time well. So the second step is to read the narrative. Now, within the narrative, there's some very important information. First and foremost, there are the requireds or assessment opportunities. Those words are interchangeable. What are you being asked to do? You're also provided with your role, the user and their objectives, and the timeline. When it comes to your role, the users and their objectives, and the timeline, that information might be needed when you complete a required, or it might not, but it is used in a variety of ways. So your role, that's about the voice, how you write your memo, whether you're an internal employee or whether you're a consultant. The user and those objectives. It's very important to understand their objectives because you consider that in the analysis of some of the options. When it comes to the financial reporting issue, be on the lookout. Who are the users? What are important to them? For example, if there's a bank, the bank is interested in cash flow, the company's ability to pay the interest payments and, make the regular payments. So proxy for cash flow is net income. So when you are providing your recommendation based on your analysis for the financial reporting issue or issues, you need to discuss what will be the impact if there's a bank to net income. Will that increase net income or decrease net income? From a timeline perspective, it's important to write down any dates that they provide in the case. What's the current date? When's year end? Sometimes having the date timeline information, it will help you identify a hidden issue. For example, say that a contract's going to begin, it's January, and the contract is to start in March. Well, that might be a very unrealistic timeline. So that's a very important disadvantage to implement that particular option. There are several best practices, and I'm going to show you these as we create the outline. Use the required as a heading in your outline. Write the required, as I said, word for word and break it down into smaller pieces. Make sure you extract that relevant case facts and include it in your outline so you can turn it very quickly into your response. Day 2 case is very long. You don't want to be spending wasting time flipping through pages looking for information. So, because there is a lot of information under the common background information, and some of that information is not relevant for the required you're being asked to do. So because of that, I strongly recommend that you first start with the information that's specific to your role that outlines the requireds. This will provide you context. What am I being asked to do? So when you go to read the common information, you know what's relevant to what you're being asked to do. So on this slide, you'll notice that I've actually taken sections of that case. And then on the other side, I've included where that information and how I would present it in my outline. So you notice that I've highlighted key case facts, and I've also put where, kind of where they or what they apply to. I've done that specifically for illustration purposes only, so you can clearly see where the relevant case facts are. But when I'm doing my outline, I am not highlighting information. I'm not writing things in the margin. If it's important enough, I'm going to extract it. I'm going to type it into my outline as I'm reading. That way I don't have to waste time flipping back and going back and forth to find what I need when I write my response. So in this first two paragraphs, there are two requireds. Denise is asking us to perform a variance analysis. So again, it's the platinum variant analysis, so I'm going to use that as my heading. I'm going to include just a few key points to again trigger and let me know what I need to do. So I need to calculate the budgeted versus actual. She also asks us to report our findings. So I've already put a little note, why? And that why refers to why is the variance going to be favorable or unfavorable? And I need to look in the case and extract relevant case facts that, again, provide insight to the reason why that variance is favorable or unfavorable. The second assessment opportunity is she wants us to look at the K3 Press corporate or the K3 Press contract. She's asking if it should be canceled, and she's asking us to perform both a quantitative and qualitative analysis. Got my heading, got my appropriate subheadings. Quantitative analysis, qualitative analysis, and under recommendation, I need to make sure that I clearly state whether to cancel the contract. So the next paragraph, Denise, this is all about Elgard's reporting package. And she's asking us several things. So again, I'm going to kind of break it down. She asks us to review the key measures report. She asks us to recommend improvements. She also asks us to provide suggestions on how to better monitor financial results and assist NHC's decision of whether to further fund Elgar. And I put an equal sign here. This is again just a trigger for me that I need to provide some new measurements for them. So the next paragraph, well, here's those financial reporting issues. There's actually 4 of them in total. Anytime you perform a analysis of a financial reporting issue, it's critical that you use IGAR. So what I'm going to do, the benefit of creating your outline in Word is you're able to copy and paste. So for the first financial reporting issue, I'm going to put down the subheadings issue, analysis, and recommendations. Then all I need to do is copy that structure, that discussion framework, and put the same discussion framework, the same structure under the other 3 financial reporting issues. So if you notice, I'm already setting it up so that my outline has the structure in place to turn all of the information that I'm going to include in my outline into a response. What are the next 2 requests? Well, she wants us to review Elgard's proposal that they presented. My dates are a little bit different than yours to support the 2020 cash injection. She wants us to review it, to comment on Elgard's actual performance, in comparison to what they were supposed to do. So here I'm including, I need to review and comment on the actual performance. As I'm writing that, I'm thinking, okay, I need to talk about what have they achieved, What have they not achieved? And what have they exceeded? The last paragraph talks about discussing, identifying risks, and providing mitigation strategies. Okay, we're going to put the title as risks. And as soon as I start typing that I need to identify risks and provide a mitigation strategy, what comes to mind immediately is I should use what is known as the WIR format. This is a great, what we call again, structure or discussion framework, and it's effectively used when you're critiquing. So when there are operational weaknesses, governance weaknesses, risks. So this again is a reminder. Debbie, once you start identifying those risks, make sure that you use, so W can be weakness, issue, or risk. And I'm going to use that format. You'll see it shortly. So all kinds more required. So Denise also wants us to review Elgard's 6-month cash flow. And she wants us to make any necessary changes. Plus, she's also asking us to be on the lookout, to look for opportunities to reduce costs. So again, under that required, I've got my heading and I'm breaking down what she's asking me to do into smaller pieces. I've also included that there is a requirement of a minimum of 3 million cash balance at the end of the month. The next paragraph, there's actually 2 requireds. The first one is she's asking us to investigate the possibility of paying the vehicle and battery assembly employees strictly by piecework. She wants us to perform both a quantitative and qualitative analysis. So again, I'm going to put my appropriate subtitles, quantitative, qualitative analysis and recommendations. She's asking us to do the same thing for the electric bicycle proposal. Again, I'm just going to copy and paste that structure under the electric bicycle. So I'm pleased to say these are the last 2 required. The next one is Denise is asking us to recommend changes on how to improve NHC's governance and oversight of Elgar. And she's saying, that includes possible changes to the board of directors, the structure or policies and procedures. So I'm going to put recommend changes to, and I'm going to include each of those categories. So again, I make sure that I address what Denise is looking for us to do. This is another really good example of using the WIR format. Because we're critiquing, what are the weaknesses, the current weaknesses? We want to talk about the implication and provide her with recommendations. The last required is she's asking us, she said, you know what? I think that Elgard's performance, it would improve if each department had better performance indicators. So what she wants us to do is comment on the current performance measurement system and provide recommendations for improvement, suggestions. So I'm putting down, we need to evaluate the current performance indicators. And I'm already thinking I need to evaluate them. I need to explain the why. Okay. Why is it appropriate? Why isn't it? Provide some recommendations. So again, provide some new measurements. Explain why they are appropriate. So at this point, we've now completed, we've read this section that outlines the requireds, and then in this instance, it's for the performance management role. So there's quite a few requireds that I need to look at. And I want to make sure that I have a clear understanding of what those are. So, what I recommend before you start reading the common background information is to write them down on a page that's included in your rough booklet so that you have it off to the side. So, when you go to read the common information, you're thinking, oh, that would apply to this particular required. Now, don't think that this is a wasted step and it's going to take away time because this will be it's already a good start when it comes to your last step of allocating time. So here we've got all the required. I now have that written down on a piece of paper from the rough booklet. So now let's look at the common information. At this stage, we're really kind of doing a combination of step 3 and step 4. We're going to be reading the information and organizing the case facts. When you look at the common information, ask yourself, how does this relate to the required you need to do? Remember, there's some information there that you do not need. When you're looking at the role specific information, ask yourself, why were you given this information? How does it relate to the users and their objectives? I want to emphasize, if you have an exhibit and it's part of your role specific information, you've been given it for a reason. Make sure that you use it. Sometimes you'll be reading and a client will make a statement and you're thinking, that doesn't make sense. Good example of this is when they'll tell you how they handled a financial reporting issue. So if the client has, handled a reporting issue incorrectly, when you provide your recommendation, it's important to state what change needs to be made, what adjustment journal entry needs to be made, and why. When you're looking at your appendices, pay attention to the details. One of the things that I see sometimes is people don't take a note that maybe the financial information is for 6 months or 9 months, not a year. Make sure that you're putting your quantitative information under the appropriate section and your qualitative information under the qualitative section. There are instances where case facts will apply to more than one required. Great news is you've got the ability to copy and paste. When you're looking at those financial statements, be on the lookout what type of assurance has been provided. If they're unaudited, that most likely means that there are errors. Look at the number of years they present the information for. So if you're being asked to perform a ratio analysis and they've given you 2 years of financials, you need to calculate the ratio analysis for both years. That's also a trigger that you need to discuss the trend. Is the ratio improving? Is it getting worse, or is it stable? Look at those key line items, those large dollar amounts. Look for any significant changes year over year. That might be a very big hint that something was recorded incorrectly. Is there something that you'd expect to see and it's not there? Or is there something there that you wouldn't expect to see? So these are all important triggers that you carefully need to consider. So let's look at the common background information for all roles. And we're going to look at it in the context of what are the requirements for the performance management role. So we've got the users and their objectives. Let's include that in our outline. Our role. So we're part of NCH's investigation team. It also mentions that they require a return on investment of 25% after tax. Well, I am going to include that in my outline. I'm not sure where I'm going to use it, but I know I need to perform some quantitative analysis, so I might need that information. When you're reading your narrative, be on the lookout. There is normally there's some important quantitative information. I recommend extracting it, putting it in your outline. If you don't know where it goes, that's okay. But at least it's easier to find than later on go, I think there was something in that case, and then you're frantically trying to go back and find it. The next two paragraphs, the relevant information here is all about the governance and oversight required. So, first of all, she talks about that there's no formal oversight or approval of LGARD's policies by NHC. That's a weakness. Also states that Robin is LGARD's CEO and she's the only board member. That's a weakness. Also talks about Charlene, who performs a brief review of LGAR's monthly report and just archives it. So already we've identified 3 weaknesses under our governance and oversight required. The next 2 paragraphs, the relevant information is the timeline. So in this instance, it's June of 2022. Year end, again, important. It's May 31st. There's also some quantitative information. And again, I'm thinking, I don't want this information to get lost. I believe I'm going to need it. I'm just not sure where yet. So let's extract that. For example, sales were forecasted. They were forecasted to achieve $1 million pre-tax for year end. However, what actually happened is they reported a loss. They sold 812 units and the average sale price was almost $38,000. So the next Appendix 1 shows us some important information. The first thing I see is IFRS. Excellent. I need that when it comes to the financial reporting issues. So I'm going to go right under my first financial reporting issue, add under analysis IFRS, and just copy and paste IFRS and put that under every other financial reporting issue. Here's some more quantitative information. A tax rate, a borrowing rate. Let's extract that. I know I have to do some quantitative analysis. Probably going to need it. Let's extract it. They also provide LGARD's mission statement. And already I'm thinking, I know that I need to analyze the electronic bike proposal. Some of the important qualitative information is to talk about the alignment with the company's mission statement. It could apply to some of the other required, so I'm going to extract that and include it in my outline. The next paragraph, well, here's lots of valuable information for my risk assessment opportunity. So I'm going to extract that information. And at this point, I know the format I'm going to use, which is risk, implication, and recommendation. Again, I'm going to use that format. I'm just going to put in risk, implication, and recommendation. I know I've identified 4 so far, so I'm going to copy and paste that another 3 times and input each of the risks. I'll return to this later on and fill in the rest of the information. But look, I already have the structure in place. It's going to increase my chances of meeting the depth requirements. So there is more information when it comes to Appendix 1. There's also Appendix 2. And I'm just going to, because we have limited time to present all this information. So what I'm going to do is the premise that I've shown you so far, it's the same premise that you're going to use and how you extract all your relevant information. I just wanted to show you in this appendix, here's some great both quantitative information and information to potentially explain the variances. So as I'm looking through this, and again, I've highlighted things, I've bolded, I've underlined things. This is all for illustration purposes only. It's important that you figure out what works best for you. At minimum, it's important to put the page number. So you know what page number you need to return to when you perform your quantitative analysis. There's some few things that I know immediately are going to be useful, like the standard amount per battery, the standard price. So I'm going to extract that information. There's a table here. I'm going to put the page number because I want to return to it. But there's some information here that's already giving me some insights on potential reasons why there's going to be a variance. For example, that the inventory count, you know what, it's performed by only one person, and it's the first count since March. So it isn't done very often. There's a chance that there could be theft. It also says scientists from the R&D department have 24 access. They've got full access. Again, potentially some of this, once we look at our variance, if it's unfavorable, a potential reason is because some of this inventory is missing for these specific reasons. Also, at the bottom, it talks about that they sometimes dispose the batteries because they don't meet the company's quality standards and no records are kept. So again, here's another potential reason for the variance, the uncertainty when it comes to wastage. So here's what I've extracted. Here's how I'm presenting it in my outline. I've included under findings these key case facts so that I can explain why most likely that variance is. Based on these case facts, I'm thinking it's going to be unfavorable. So at this point, let's just say we've read the entire case. We have a full outline created. So now let's take a moment and kind of reflect and ask yourself, how do the issues and analysis fit together? What's the most important issue when it comes to the users of the financial statements? So again, what are they concerned with? Step 6 is about planning what you're going to do. Now, the best practice that I've showed you, you've already started to plan what you're going to do because you created the structure that you need, which has allowed you to kind of, determine, do I need to do a quantitative analysis? Do I need to do a qualitative analysis? What specific items do I need to discuss? One thing you need to consider, how do the requireds integrate? And what that means is, in this instance, does your analysis of one of the required and your recommendation impact your analysis of another required? So when there are financial reporting issues, most likely you need to address those first, even though they're not the most important thing, but you need to address them first because your recommendations and the required adjustments, it's going to impact another requirement. For example, if you're asked to calculate materiality, or you're asked to calculate business income, you need to make the appropriate adjustments. When you look at step 7 and 8, you're really doing those together. So you've started to think about the integration. That helps you order the requireds. You want to rank the topics. What are the most important things? Because ranking it also gives you a really good sense of how much time you need to dedicate to that particular required. Consider it from making sure that there's a logical flow. Think about the risks of the transaction, you know, the immediacy of need. Think about the volume and coverage. And what that means is if there's a full page or 3/4 of a page dedicated to this specific required, it's pretty important and an associated exhibit. The last stage is all about allocating your time. I want to caution you. Make sure that when you're allocating your time, sometimes we put more time against the requireds that we know very well that we like. When in fact, more likely, you can complete those quicker. Look at the information you already have in your outline. So that's an important factor to consider. And what type of analysis do you need to perform? That dictates how much time you should dedicate. If there's certain required and you really struggle with them, unless if there's no example of integration, a need of integration, which means you have to address one before another, then perhaps it makes more sense for you to address those required first when you're at your best, opposed to waiting until your 4th hour when you're starting to get tired. A very important concept is you must stick to your time budget. That is critical. Day 2 is the only time that you have the ability to meet the depth requirement for your role, and you want to pass level 3. So level 3 is all about your role, and it's all about meeting an undisclosed number of competent responses. So again, I'm sharing some information that I went through in the Understanding CFE. So if you haven't watched it, it's very important that you do. So here is a proposed time allocation. So we've started with the reading, outlining, and planning. And then I've looked at, here are all the requireds. If you noticed, beside piecemeal and electric bike, I have QQC, which stands for quantitative, qualitative, and conclusion. You'll also notice that I've included some time at the end to review. That allows me the opportunity to kind of go back quickly and make sure that I've addressed everything I needed to do. It is critical. So this time allocation, I'm not going to include it in my outline because I don't want to be scrolling up and down to look at it. I'm going to have that off on the side so that I can always look at it and I can quickly look at the time and judge. Remember, what you want to complete all of the assessment opportunities to your best ability within the time frame that you're given. This increases your chances of passing level 1, 2, 3, and 4. So let's take some time and talk about the quantitative and qualitative analysis. The general approach is that you perform your quantitative analysis first. The main reason for that is because within your quantitative analysis, you may find a hidden qualitative factor. Let me provide you with an example. So say you are performing a net present value analysis. And over the 20 years, it's viable. It's a viable option from a quantitative perspective because it's, say $1 million. However, the first 2 years, the cash flow is negative, which means the company would need to fund that negative cash flow. That's an important qualitative factor. Every quantitative analysis should include a purpose and conclusion that relates to the issue and the user's needs. So I'm hoping everybody is aware that when it comes to Excel, you only have one tab that you're able to perform calculations. Therefore, it's critical that you include your purpose and conclusion. If you have a complex quantitative analysis, to ensure it's easy to follow, we recommend that you organize it into 2 sections. So the first section is a high-level summary of the findings, and then the second section includes the detailed calculations. So let me give you an example. So say you're calculating business income, and there's several deductions and several add backs. In the top section, you would just include one line that would have the total add backs and one line that would include the total deductions. In the second section underneath, you would have those deductions and add backs done, shown individually, and then the total. It makes it much easier to follow. When you're planning your quantitative analysis, there's really 3 tasks that generally need to be completed. So what is the purpose of your analysis? What question are you trying to answer? What information have you been provided with? Based on the type of question you're trying to answer, the type of information that you've been provided, those are all triggers to help you determine the appropriate quantitative tool to use. Now, if you struggle identifying the appropriate quantitative analysis to perform, please attend our live webinar or watch our last webinar, Time Management and Day 3. Because during that webinar, I'm also going to go through several of the quantitative tools and talk about the types of information that tool provides. The best practice is before stating your quantitative analysis, make sure that so before you start it, make sure that you're determine the most effective way, the most effective approach. Be honest with yourself. Sometimes do you make your quantitative analysis overly complicated. It's important. So when you're debriefing, look at the solution. Look at how could you have done this much easier. It saves you valuable time. So for example, if you're asked to recalculate net income, start with the current net income and then make the appropriate adjustments. The comment at the bottom of the slide is very important. You are not expected to perform a perfect quantitative analysis. I need to say that again. I know many of you are perfectionists. You do not need or are you expected to perform a perfect quantitative analysis to achieve a competent response. As you write these cases and as you debrief, you are going to get a better sense of what you need to do for a competent response. One of the things that we always talk about is you will get a sense of when enough is enough and you need to move on. Your quantitative analysis, it should be prepared in Excel. You should not copy your quantitative calculations and input that in Word unless you're specifically asked to do. And based on my extensive experience in the CFE cases, I've never seen an example where you've been asked to do that. The next point is critical. So remember that the CFE marker doesn't have the ability to ask you to further clarify the information presented. They can't say, Debbie, how did you arrive at that revenue number? I noticed that, you know what, the units have been the same, the sales price is the same, and yet your revenue is increasing. The CFE writer is not expected to look at your formula when it comes to your inputs. So say I include a 10% annual revenue increase. I need to include that in the note. The best way to do is beside revenue, put bracket 10% annual increase, because that tells them what I've considered as part of that input, how I've arrived at that number. Now, you don't need to explain the basic math that include those formulas. For example, that selling price minus variable cost equals contribution margin. Notes are extremely important because the marker needs to understand how you got to those input numbers. If you take and you calculate, I've seen candidates under year 0 and there's several investment costs and they just include them all as one number. The marker isn't able to see there's probably those items are probably individualized. They're not sure how you arrived at that number. The only way they can is if they look at your formulas, and they're not expected to do that. So make sure that you provide notes. Simply performing your quantitative analysis, that's not enough for a competent response. So there's some very important requirements when it comes to your memo. Number 1 is to reference that exhibit. Now that doesn't mean just to say, see exhibit 1, that's it. That will not get you to a competent. You need to state what the results were and provide an interpretation of the results. Okay, when I say state the results, you just need to state that the NPV is. You don't have to explain how you arrived at that calculation. That's all in Excel. But interpret the results. Is it a viable option from a quantitative perspective? Sometimes, not always, this is important in the day one case, you need to include key assumptions. This is, you need to be directed by what's included in the case. So key assumptions is you're not relisting all the inputs in your quantitative analysis. Again, that's all in Excel. But is there some information in the case that indicates, hey, some of these numbers may not be right? For example, you may be asked to use 10% revenue increase. And in the case, they state that industry growth rate is 5%. Well, that's a significant difference. If you're looking at an NPV over 10 years, and if your NPV is only maybe 30,000, the difference between 10% and 5% could turn from a positive NPV to a negative. So it's important to discuss that assumption and then state what the impact would be to your quantitative analysis, okay, your results. Don't simply state, if this amount is different, then the result would be different. That is fundamental math. You've got to integrate case facts to support what could happen, and would that have a positive or negative impact to your quantitative results. When you perform your qualitative analysis, again, whether you use pros, cons, advantages, disadvantages, risks, opportunities, doesn't matter, make sure that you have those categories. You must not just include the case fact. It was given to you. You need to answer that question, so what? What is the potential positive or negative impact to the company? Now, I know candidates say, Debbie, it's obvious. Well, what we think as professionals is obvious to us is not always obvious to the user. Also, the marker isn't able to read your mind. They don't know what you were thinking, and they can only give you credit for what's on the page. Make sure you address that so what and discuss why. Why is it an advantage? What's the potential positive impact to the company? When you're providing a recommendation, it's important that your recommendation is comprehensive. It includes, you're going to highlight the, 3 to 4 strongest quantitative and qualitative reasons why you've provided your recommendation. Don't simply state, based on my quantitative and qualitative recommendation, based on my quantitative and qualitative analysis, I recommend implementing this option. Not all qualitative factors are equal. This is where you add advice. Now, make a decision, provide a recommendation. In 99.9% of the instances, they've given you enough to provide a recommendation. I notice some candidates are very hesitant. If you know that there's an assumption or you're worried about a particular risk, provide a recommendation if you recommend to implement it, but you want to validate a specific assumption or say that you've calculated the valuation, but the company's provided unaudited financial statements. You can kind of include a disclaimer that you recommend implementing the option, provide the quantitative and qualitative reasons why, but before they do actually implement it, that it's important to validate the information provided in the financial statement. So ask for audited statements. That is very acceptable. If there's a big risk, a very important disadvantage, provide the user with a mitigation strategy. So let's take some time and close that gap between your response, so say a reaching competent response, and a competent response. I want to focus on financial reporting because we know in order to pass level 2, you need to achieve a certain number of competent, an undisclosed number of competent responses when it comes to financial reporting or management accounting. So as I'm reading this information, I want you to ask yourself, are these areas I struggle with? What do I need to do differently? Failing to recognize the issue. Is that a critical reading challenge? Analyzing the issue using the wrong reporting framework. That is a fatal error because if you're using the wrong reporting framework, there's no chance of you achieving a competent response. So you notice as soon as I saw IFRS, I'm like, include that, include that under every financial reporting issue. Failure to incorporate the appropriate facts into your analysis. So what you're doing is you're just simply dumping the information, copying and pasting, sections from the handbook. Sure, you're able to do that, but doing that alone is never going to end up achieving a competent response. Some candidates, what they do is they identify the issue. They even provide an appropriate recommendation. However, there's no analysis. There's no rationale. The marker needs to understand how you arrived at your conclusion, whether it's right or not. They still need to understand your analysis piece, which is critical to achieving a competent response. So again, use the IGAR format, and it's very closely linked to the CPA way. Step 1 of the CPA way is to assess the situation. So that's to identify the issue, to identify the proper reporting framework. Step 2 of the CPA way is to analyze the issue. A for analyze. Step 3 is all about conclude and advise. That's the recommendation. So let's take a moment and go through each of these steps. So when you're assessing the situation, be sure that you have a clear understanding of what happened. Okay, did they actually record revenue or what they're planning to do? It's important to kind of have a synopsis of the current situation. I love the third point. Is there more than one financial reporting issue? If there is, you need to address those individually. If you try and lump them all together, it's almost impossible to achieve a competent response. Let me give you an example. Say that they have a new contract with a supplier or a company, and they're asking you how to record the signing bonus. Plus, they're also asking you how to record the products that they've sent. But in the contract, it has, right of refusal for 30 days. Those are two separate revenue recognition issues, and they must be addressed accordingly. Who are those key users? What are they interested in? Because that is an important piece that you need to discuss when you provide your overall recommendation. So make sure the issue statement is just a clear statement of what the issue is. Do not provide a conclusion before you even perform an analysis. For example, do not state revenue was recorded incorrectly. That is not an issue statement. That's a conclusion. An issue statement is to determine whether revenue was recorded correctly and potentially at what amount, if that's appropriate. Step two is that analysis piece. So we know that's a critical piece. The best advice I could give you is ensure that you're comfortable with, with as many financial reporting issues. Use that competency map. Make sure that you're comfortable with the financial reporting issues that are proficiency level A. Be able to paraphrase the criteria. So when you're analyzing, you're going to quickly be able to paraphrase the criteria individually, and then under each criteria, put the relevant case back and state whether it is met or not. Within your analysis, there are instances where the user has an accounting policy choice. So let me provide you with an example. So for ASPE, when it comes to the development cost, the user has a choice to either expense the cost or to capitalize them. Well, you need to discuss both options as part of your analysis. When it comes to your recommendation, you need to consider the user's objectives. So say the user wants to minimize tax. Then the recommendation is going to be to capitalize those development costs. Say the user wants to sell their company and the value is determined based on net income. Well, they want the highest possible net income, which means your recommendation is to capitalize those development costs. So again, it's tying that recommended accounting policy choice to the user's objectives. When it comes to conclude and advise, your recommendation, make sure that your recommendation is consistent with your analysis. State what you're recommending clearly and why. So also talk about what's the financial impact, okay, to the area that the user's concerned with. Because it's important to talk about the financial impact and provide the user with the required adjustment, sometimes you need to provide that adjustment to achieve a competent. I recommend adding another subtitle. So make it, instead of IGAR, make it IGAR-I. And I stands for impact. That's going to increase your chances of talking about the impact to the area that the users are concerned about. The great news is using IGAR ensures that your response is clear and concise, and it also helps you write an effective and efficient response under your time constraints. So let's talk about understanding expectations. As you know, there's several competency levels, but we're really focusing on reaching competent and competent. And competent, we know, is going to give us a stronger value when it comes to level 1. We're not focusing on reaching competent with distinction because that most likely is going to mean that we've spent too much time on that required, and as a result, we're not able to, complete other requirements. So a competent response means it's both the breadth and the depth, and I've talked about this. Breadth, qualitative, that's the number of appropriate qualitative factors, and it's based on the case facts provided. I find candidates make up all kinds of qualitative factors. No, there's more than enough given to you in the case. Quantitative, the number of appropriate inputs. Depth, explain that why and the impact when it comes to your qualitative. Make sure quantitative that you don't just say, see Exhibit 1. You provide an interpretation of those results. Is it viable? If there's important assumptions, discuss them, identify those assumptions, and talk about the financial impact to the quantitative results. So I'm hoping you've written quite a few cases so far at this point. Ask yourself, based on your performance to date, have you been able to identify all the assessment opportunities? Do you have the required technical knowledge? Were you able to effectively communicate your technical knowledge? Some candidates think that more often than not, candidates fail CFE, it's because of their technical knowledge. That's not the case. However, a caveat is the Board of Examiners recently are finding that candidates' technical knowledge, for some, it's not where it needs to be. So we're going to talk about that shortly. But the biggest area and the biggest reason why candidates fail CFE is the enabling competencies. It's critical that you are able to write an effective and efficient response, managing your time, focusing on those key factors when you're performing your analysis. The goal is to demonstrate that you have a clear understanding of the key factors that should be considered in your analysis, and as a result, your recommendations are credible and viable. It's not about information dumping. We've all done it. I've done it when I was in university and just dumped everything on the page. Here's everything I know. Hopefully, I'm going to give you something that you need. This is about customizing your response based on the circumstances and the user's needs. Make sure from a technical perspective, the competency map is your syllabus. Go and look at that stress management. I showed you how you can sort the Excel tool. Make sure that you're aware of the proficiency levels. So for day 1, day 3, it's all being tested at the core level. Day 2 for your role, it's the elective level. So that's higher expectations. The other assessment opportunities are at the core level. As you're tracking your performance, it's important to track. You need to see that you're improving. That's going to build your confidence. But there's 3 buckets you need to look at. Are there behaviors such as you're reading too quickly? Write a note. Debbie, slow down. You're forgetting the why and impact. Debbie, remember why. Impact. Are you missing some of those triggers? Make a list. There's only so many ways they can ask you to perform a contribution margin. Make a list of some of the kinds of things that they say that's going to indicate this is what you need to do. Technical, identify the areas you're challenged in. Here are some valuable resources. So if you're challenging the exam, you're not taking Capstone 2, there's there's 18 units under the Introduction to Capstone 2 in CFE. It's study material. In those units, there's 16 day 3 cases, 2 day 2 cases. There's cases, solution, feedback guides, debrief notes, walkthroughs, lots of information. For those in Capstone 2, there's also additional cases besides the ones that you're writing and being marked by the National Marking System Center. For day 1, if you're in Capstone 2, you have 3 sample cases. For those of you who are challenged in the exam, go to the Board of Examiners reports. They're going to give you previous day 1 exams. Once they've retired them, then you get the case, the marking guide, and the solution. Practice writing an outline, your response, performing quantitative and qualitative analysis for the required, looking at the significant issues and providing overarching, the overall recommendations. All the principles are the same. The enabling competency when it comes to financial reporting issues, Chapter 5 is great. There's flashcards. CPA Canada's already put some valuable information for you. So I'm actually showing you here a sample of IFRS 15, the 5 steps. Also about One whole card dedicated to performance obligations. When I think revenue recognition, the first thing I think of is be on the lookout for performance obligations. Are there more than one? So this is also a great resource, the webinar series, okay? The different. So understanding CFE, stress management, day one Viviana's, day one Neptune, all available, the recordings now. The path to competent in day two, that recording will be available shortly. And time management in day three, the last one is Wednesday. So I'd now like to open up the floor for any questions that you have.
Thank you so much, Debbie. The rest of us in the background here have been madly typing away in the background, answering a very active Q&A box this evening. Before we get into specific questions, I'm just going to reinforce what Debbie just mentioned. Wednesday night, we are hosting the last of these webinar series, talking about day three, but also really touching on one of the big topics in the Q&A box tonight, time management. There have been a lot of questions this evening about how, can I do this to save time? Can I do that to save time? What are some tips and tricks in order to save time? So first thing I'm going to do is really recommend to everybody, please, if you possibly can, find time in your schedule Wednesday evening to join us for another great webinar by Debbie talking about tips and tricks for managing your time on the CFE. And if you're not able to make it Wednesday night, we will be recording that webinar as well, and it will also be posted on D2L. But maybe as a lead into the Q&A, Debbie, and I don't want to take away anything from Wednesday night, do you have one or two quick tips for people to save time on the CFE?
Well, if I looked at day one, I provided you with how to create an outline for day one. This evening, I provided you some advice on how to create an outline for day two. Your outline is a very important component of managing your time effectively. If you extract the information that you need, it might take you maybe a few more minutes, but what happens is you will be pleasantly surprised to see how much information you already had at hand. Let's just look at when I looked at that narrative and I pulled out 4 risks. It's not going to take me much time to write my response because I already have my structure in. It's a very easy way of presenting the information. I don't need to include a whole paragraph for each of the risks, and I can turn that into a response very quickly. I can take those 4 and turn that into a response 5 minutes easily. So one of the biggest time management tools is making sure that you're not flipping through information, you know, and creating an automated outline. If you're spending a lot of time creating it on the page and then you're having to spend time retyping it into Word, that's wasted time. Put it into Word right away. So that's one of the biggest things. Practice really helps with critical reading because you start to get a good sense of what are they asking me to do? How do I structure my response? When I'm creating that outline, I'm also structuring my response. What's happening? My brain's already working. I'm already thinking about what do I need to do. If I need to give myself a friendly reminder, type it in so that when I go back, I'm not sitting there thinking, what am I going to do?
And I'll add a little footnote to that, Debbie, just exactly what you mentioned just a few minutes ago. Practice, there's only so many different ways that something can be asked. The more practice you do, you see some of those things recurring over and over again.
Absolutely. It's like when you think of, oh, want to maximize probability. Oh, contribution margin. And before they've even said anything else, I'm thinking contribution margin per constraint. Where's the constraint? And that's because I'm so used to writing cases, and that's one of the common requirements that already my mind's going in the right direction before they even give me the information.
Another question that I thought was very good to share with everyone, Debbie. There's a lot of assessment opportunities in day two, common assessment opportunities, role-specific assessment opportunities. Can you give some advice on how to set the priorities? Obviously, not everything in the case is going to be equally important. How do I decide where to spend the most time and which ones can be a lower priority?
Okay, so that's a very good question. Remember, day two is the only day that you can demonstrate depth in your role. And I'll tell you, I'm going to reflect and share something that happened to me as an exam supervisor. Is I've seen this happen a few times, and one candidate asked to talk to me because she had spent a disproportional amount of time on those opportunities, those common opportunities, right? And she was now at the last hour and she said, I need to talk to you. And so I said, okay. I was a little bit surprised. And she said, I have spent way too much time on financial reporting issues, and I'm just starting my assessment opportunities when it comes to my role. You need to make sure that you're not spending a disproportional amount of time on any one required. If you get stuck, move on. Lots of times I find if I get stuck on something, if I move on and I'm starting to look at something else, I kind of relax a bit and then it comes back to me, oh, that's what I need to do. But your time allocation is critical. You need to complete to the best of your ability those assessment opportunities. So you only have so much time. That prioritize what you need to do.
Thanks, Debbie. Um, just to add on to that, I often, when I'm looking at a case, I ask myself, will the company survive if we don't do this? If the answer is no, if we don't fix this, the company is going to explode. That is a top priority. I need to address that right off the bat. If I can say to myself, yeah, well, they'd probably be okay, that right there is a much lower priority. And again, help you make some of those judgment calls when you're looking at a specific case.
That's a really good example of that, step 8 of ranking, right? So ranking it on immediacy and the impact to the company's viability. Absolutely. But I want to make sure that we're clear that neither one of us is saying that means that you don't address several assessment opportunities. So it's critical that you practice. Practice improves. You get faster at doing these things as you do them more often. Determine where your technical deficiencies are so that you can go back and spend time on that and enhance it, your learning, so that again, when you tackle something along that lines, you're able to do it quicker.
If you don't address it at all, the marker assumes you didn't see that was even an issue.
Absolutely.
Okay, those are certainly the biggest, most common questions that came out. I'm just taking a quick peek here to make sure we haven't missed any. I think we have all the key ones, and certainly individual ones have been addressed in the Q&A box. I'm just going to put in one more plug because it was such a hot topic this evening. Wednesday's webinar specifically talks about time management and the day 3 cases on the CFE. So really encourage everyone, if you can possibly squeeze it into your schedule, please try to make it, either make it on Wednesday or watch the recording. Again, all these webinars are being recorded and are being posted to D2L. Debbie, thanks once again for all your great advice and taking the time to help everyone with getting ready for the CFE. Thanks to everybody for attending, and hope to see everybody again on Wednesday.